I'm going to read to you from this book. Page 287, 1959. By January the 10th, Allen had written 5 large sections of Kaddish, with a centerpiece of strophic narrative interspersed with chants and hymns. It was better and wilder than Howl, and he felt it was close to Bach in construction. His own poetry was occupying so much of his time now that he decided to put the whole City Lights anthology on hold indefinitely. The Goof Book, as he had been planning to call it, seemed relatively unimportant when weighed against his achievement in his latest poem. He never went back to the project, but Ferlinghetti put together a similar collection for publication and called it the Beatitude Anthology. Allen was also able to renegotiate the royalties for Howl and other poems with City Lights. Now that it had sold 20,000 copies, he asked for a higher percentage from Lawrence, who agreed to give him 12% in the future, higher than any other City Lights author would ever earn. At the same time, Allen asked that the next printing be made with all the dirty words in Howl reinstated, instead of using an asterisk in their place. "It's illegal, isn't it?" he asked his publisher. Lawrence agreed, and beginning with the next printing, all the words were included and no further legal problems ensued. Allen had been on the verge of seeking a regular job when he asked Ferlinghetti for the extra royalty money. Since returning from Paris, he had been living on Peter's wages, and that money was stretched even thinner by Corso's return. Peter's younger sister, Marie, had also moved into the apartment while she was studying to be a nurse at Colt Memorial Babies Hospital in Newark. Marie had also been in a mental hospital, but she was working hard to get out of the cycle of welfare and institutionalization that had plagued Peter's whole family. At that moment, monetary relief came to Allen from an unexpected source. The photographer, Robert Frank, a friend of Kerouac's, had been able to get financial backing for a black and white film he wanted to make with the Beats. Frank was a plain man, without pretension, and one of the world's greatest photographers. His movie script was to be based on one of Kerouac's plays and was later titled Pull My Daisy. The best part of the project was that he needed everyone to work as actors, for which they would each be paid $18 a day for at least 5 days during the shooting. For Allen and Peter, that was a great deal of money, and for Allen in particular. It meant that he could continue to write poetry and postpone washing dishes for a while. The movie was shot in New York, in the loft of Alfred Leslie. It roughly told the story of a bishop's visit to Neil and Carolyn Cassidy. The painter, Larry Rivers, played Neil's part, and Allen, Peter, and Gregory played themselves as mischievous poets. When Allen wrote to tell Carolyn and Neil about the project, he wasn't able to think of the name of the woman who played Carolyn. "A good-looking actress is acting as you, Carolyn," he wrote. The actress was Delphine Seyrig. They very much on the same scene in the New York art world, but as a woman, not on Allen's radar screen. This was similar to other situations concerning women in Allen's life. Years earlier, in Mexico City, Allen had been given the address of Frida Kahlo. He referred to her in several letters as the widow of Diego Rivera, but never by her own name, and in fact, he never bothered to visit her. Had she been a man, he would have gone out of his way to rendezvous with someone of her fame and stature. When identifying people in snapshots, Allen frequently glossed over the women in the picture, either not remembering their names or identifying them as so-and-so's wife or girlfriend, lady painter, and so on. It was a peculiar lacuna, possibly stemming from the boys' club mentality of the 1950s, where women, like children, were to be seen and not heard. Allen had a few strong female friendships in later years with poets Diane de Prima and Anne Waldman, but it was almost as if he had to force himself to remember to include women in his normal routines. They did not play a large role in his life, with the monumental exception of his mother. Allen was not uncaring or in any way misogynistic, but he had a blind spot for women and was the eternal female perspective. January 1959 turned out to be a very busy month for Allen. Al Aronovich, a reporter from the New York Post, was working on a 12-part series about the Beat Generation that was scheduled to come out in March. The series was both sympathetic and interesting, and such positive coverage was highly unusual in those days. Aronovich had interviewed Allen and relied on him for many of the contacts he was using to write the series. Allen was also too happy to help to ensure that it would be honest and well balanced and not sensationalized, as most other Beat reportage had been. All the attendant publicity from the Post series added fuel to the Beat craze and put additional demands on Ginsberg's time for more interviews. This same month, he agreed to write an introduction for Ben Lowingson's first book of poems, Watermelons. Lowingson was a 21-year-old poet Allen had gotten to know in California, and since Allen liked his work, he encouraged him much as Williams had done so for him. Kerouac continued to isolate himself at his mother's house, writing peacefully, but he was often in New York visiting his girlfriend, Dodie. While in the city, he intended to get drunk too quickly, and that energy in belligerent arguments with friends and strangers alike. There was too much commotion for him in the village bars, but he couldn't resist. Okay, going to stop there.